One of the biggest complaints about small crossovers is that they all seem to blend in with one another. But after testing 4 of some of the most popular in the segment, I have come to the conclusion that they each have their own distinct highs, but also some deal-breaking lows. So today I'm going to try to help those who are on the fence between one of these, or at the very least acquaint you with all of them and show you which one is quickest to 60. And if you enjoy fun, detailed car content, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications. The first car I'm in today is the Mazda CX30, which is technically a 2022. We are not expecting any significant changes for 23, but I'll keep you posted on that. Under the hood, you'll have 2 choices of engines: a naturally aspirated 2.5 liter inline 4 or a turbocharged version of that, and that's what I have here today. Earlier this year, I test drove the naturally aspirated engine, that's the volume seller, and it put out a 0 to 60 time of about 8.6 seconds. You know what? This is actually more potent than I remember. It was more than adequate for this type of vehicle. It just kind of detracted from the otherwise premium experience just because it sounds like more of an economy engine. And when paired up with the 6-speed automatic, sometimes it wouldn't choose the right ratio, leading to a somewhat unrefined experience. This turbo is one of my favorite forced induction engines among the mainstream brands. 310 pound-feet of torque on regular gas is why. And that's what I have it in here today. You can actually bump that up to 250 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque if you throw in premium. I also love it for its lack of turbo lag due to the dynamic pressure system I'll explain soon. I'd briefly like to thank the awesome dealerships Royal South Mazda and Royal on the Eastside in Bloomington, Indiana for loaning me most of the cars used today. If you're in the market, be sure to check them out. And the standard car still makes like 186 horsepower. It's honestly on top of the class either way you go. But now let's see what the turbo will do to 60. For each test, I will shut off traction control if I'm able to, shut off AC, and put it in sport mode if it has it. Shifts comically slow. That grunt is so prominent. 0 to 60 there came up in a very solid 6.2 seconds. With premium fuel, expect to get into the high 5s. The turbocharger in here is a variable vane unit, which sends air down a smaller vane at low RPMs to increase turbine response. You don't have to mash the gas and wait for thrust as a result. And that allows for a ton of passing power and an extremely relaxed feel. The steering is nicely weighted and quite precise. Body roll is kept to a good amount, and there's just a tad bit of feedback there. The steering is super predictable. The only complaint I can think of is that some might consider it too heavy. For being the only vehicle here without independent rear suspension, the Mazda CX30 still handles really well. It's very smooth over bumps. You start to notice the difference when, I'm going over these really rough patches of road and the whole rear end is kind of affected by it. It just makes it feel a bit more jittery, and that's dramatized when you're going around those kinds of things and corners. And on most roads, I would characterize it as supple. It's a touch on the firm side for this type of vehicle. And once you're at higher speeds, this is quiet for the class, and that's relative speaking, but still, if you're looking for the most serene subcompact SUV, if you even want to call it that, I think the CX30 is probably your best bet. Gas mileage is just okay, but really the only downside to highway cruising in this thing is that most cars won't have a lane centering function, and even then it's pretty limited in its usage. All the active safety stuff in most Mazdas is just kind of a few ticks below other brands. It's not really a priority for them. So if you want the most fun and premium driving experience in the segment, the CX30 is just hard to beat, but there are limitations. Part of Mazda's vision to make things more driver-centric includes an infotainment system that is oversimplified. So it can make some things like just tuning the radio just have a couple extra steps there, and a lot of people will voice their complaints about how they just want to use it as a touchscreen. And I get that, but the appeal here is that while you're driving, I can rest my hand where it would normally be and I can, change whatever I need to. And the controls themselves are nice and clicky. The ergonomics in here are just good. I like my seating position. I have really soft elbow rest points. I have soft touch where my knees rest. The only complaint I have is that these seats kind of pinch the top of your shoulders a little bit. And that's unfortunate because this does still have lumbar adjustment and the seats are comfortable otherwise. And I also really like the analog approach and the excessive use of soft materials and leather in here. But for some people, the Mazda has deal-breaking flaws, like the visibility. I could live with it. I think it kind of adds to the sporty, luxurious feeling, but these windows are downright tiny. Plus, the back seat is tight for the segment and would probably struggle to accommodate a rear-facing child seat, and the trunk is just barely adequate. But one thing that I think is a big draw for it is that it now has standard all-wheel drive. And it's a decent system at that, especially with the off-road mode. But it can actually divert power left to right. It's more limited by its ground clearance than anything. But now let's try out the Crosstrek from a brand known for its standard all-wheel drive. In the 6-speed manual variant of the Subaru Crosstrek, you will have what Subaru calls continuous all-wheel drive. In all Subarus, it's full-time. But in here, in particular, we have a viscous LSD in the center. That is going to give it a 50-50 split under normal conditions, and then it can adjust even more torque to the rear wheels if necessary. It's a very effective setup in poor conditions, and since it's a boxer engine, a 2-liter or 2.5-liter, you'll have a lower center of gravity, and I'll talk more about the importance of that here soon. So the 2-liter in my car here makes 152 horsepower. The Sport and Limited will get a 2.5-liter that makes 182 horsepower. This is the same engine that powers the bigger Forester and Outback. 0 to 60 with something like that will come up in the mid-8s. It's still definitely not a rocket ship, but it does ease up on the stress of the Crosstrek, especially if you drive with the thing loaded up quite a bit or in mountainous areas. The manual is only available there on the lower 2 trims. And only 3-pedal models do without Subaru's EyeSight suite of active safety tech. Blind spot monitoring isn't even available for the stick. And manual Crosstreks as a whole are rarely available, even without a market shortage. So most will end up with a CVT, which typically produces a 0 to 60 of 10 seconds with the 2-liter. An unimportant stat for something like a Crosstrek, but let's see what we can get with the 2026 speed anyway. Disclaimer, the rev hang in here means the 1 to 2 shift needs to be a little slow or else the result is violent. I still bog down. A little bit smoother shift. You kind of can't just dump the clutch there. You really just can't. 0 to 60, 9.6 seconds. Respectable given the DA, a little bit faster than I probably would have gotten with a standard 2-liter Crosstrek in this kind of situation, although she don't like doing that, so I would advise not doing that when you can. The CVT responds quickly, but often exaggerates its power, especially at low speeds, so give it a little bit of gas and it's like, and that can make for a sometimes lurchy experience. Once moving, the CVT responds well. It doesn't do much fake shifting, but that helps it be more effective at the cost of sounding like a moped. The 6-speed manual has a kind of short clutch with a nice feel to it. It's a little notchy, but smooth. And it really does make driving the Crosstrek on a daily basis a more fun experience. And around corners, this also shines. The steering is numb, and I don't think its on-center feel is as precise as what's in the Honda HR-V, but it does change direction very quick. Body roll is pretty well kept, improving turn-in even more, allowing this to feel very capable. And since they didn't have to spring this super stiff to compensate for a higher center of gravity, the comfort levels in here are very impressive, even over bad roads. In fact, I, without a doubt, would call this the most comfortable vehicle on harsh roads in the class. Probably the most controlled in the class, better than the CX30 and HR-V in my opinion. It's just not disturbed by anything and feels like a more substantial car than the price and footprint suggest. Albeit these aren't exactly a bargain, especially when you consider the price of even just a Subaru Forester. Really, the biggest downfall compared to that car is just going to be the cargo space. It's just not all that impressive, but at the very least, someone that is my height can fit in the front and back with no problems. Quite a bit of rev hang, but noise levels aren't all that bad. At 60 miles per hour, we're about 2,500 RPM, so revving a little high. Revs will be lower if you're with the CVT. And road noise is about average for the class, maybe a little bit quieter than the HRV, not quite to the CX30. One of the things I appreciate the most about the Crosstrek is its visibility. You have very big windows in the front and around the sides. The material choices feel rugged, although a little bit cheaper than the others, even if you spec it in the limited. At the very least, you retain pretty intuitive analog controls for just about everything. The infotainment system is definitely starting to date itself, whether you're with the 6.5-inch or the 8-inch screen.
Meaning the Crosstrek feels the oldest in the bunch, yet it is still a great option. And then there's the Honda HRV, which is similar on paper, but not in practice.
Under the hood is Honda's venerable K20. Which there's a ton of different versions of it. It makes 158 horsepower and 138 pound-feet of torque. What does that feel like? Wonderful. And it comes paired up to a continuously variable transmission. And before everyone harasses this thing in the comments section, Honda actually makes a fairly dependable CVT, and they have for a while.
However, just because it's sturdy does not mean it is free of criticism. Let me show you why with a quick 0 to 60.
We got a 0 to 60 there of 10 seconds flat. What's more important to people that are buying these things than peak G-forces upon launch is highway passing power. And this has just enough of that. Doesn't sound great, but it gets up to speed. It's a little bit more responsive there at the higher speeds because the transmission actually allows it to get into the RPMs it needs to be in order to produce power. At the low end, it just took forever to get into the higher RPMs, leading for very, very poor performance off the line and really up until about 30 miles per hour.
Think I'm being harsh? After filming this, I drove a 1970 Beetle with about 50 horsepower. It did 60 in almost 21 seconds, yet beat the HRV to 20 miles per hour. The gearing in this is that bad. In regular driving, it's not unsafe, but it is a nuisance when you ask more from it.
It's quite pleasant at highway speeds. Outside of the road noise, it is noticeably louder than something like the CX30, which I was a little bit disappointed by because the interior is really nice. Panel gaps, really all the fit and finish is great. The material choice is right there, close second to the Mazda, and it has so much better visibility too. Honestly, after driving them back to back, I think this actually might be the more fun car to drive, just when you include the fact of better visibility and still very playful steering. The edge just goes to the Mazda and I think steering calibration.
Because that feels more predictable and requires a little less correction.
And whenever you get this on really appalling roads, you'll notice it is kind of firm and feels sure-footed.
It's a touch behind the most forgiving in the class, but I would label this comfortable yet entertaining. The steering is light and direct with a mild grasp of feedback. Turn the wheel and the car reacts quickly. It feels tight on center, yet not darty.
What Honda's done here is taken a small car with pokey straight line performance and made it legitimately fun to drive. Even around the city, I think this is just a little joy. And I also really appreciate the analog approach to its premium interior, just like the Mazda, but it's a little bit easier for most people to get a grasp because you have a standard touchscreen with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto on the top trim, still a volume knob there, all your physical controls remain intact, and a great virtual gauge cluster will come standard on all HRVs. For 2023, the Honda HRV is underpinned by the Honda Global Architecture, vastly improving the car. The only thing is, the cargo area, which is still good for the class, just isn't as insanely well packaged as the previous car. And it doesn't have the magic seats either, which were really cool. But passenger comfort is definitely up. And you still have space for someone 6'3" in both the front and rear row. This model does have all-wheel drive. It's Honda's real-time system. The unfortunate part about this setup is that it's not really that good when it comes to transferring power side to side, at least from what I've seen other outlets do. I'm not really able to take this thing off-roading anywhere nearby. This is more so for snowy public roads and parking lots than it is for hardcore camping. If you want something like that, I would just stick with the Crosstrek.
For most pint-sized SUV buyers, this should have enough capability. Personally, I was most disappointed by the somewhat awkward, stiff front seats that lack lumbar adjustment, a feature also missing in the Crosstrek. Gas mileage with the all-wheel drive model is also slightly disappointing given the power output. The HR-V is easy to recommend though. It's premium, fun, practical, affordable, and comes with a tried and true powertrain. It would be even more of a no-brainer if they at least offered the 1.5 turbo or a hybrid to boost the performance for those that live high in elevation or haul lots of stuff. It also deserves another top trim, as it does miss out on some high-end features others offer. The VW Taos has more fancy amenities, but is more polarizing.
In the turbocharged dual clutch all-wheel drive VW Taos, there's really a lot to love, and I mean a lot. This is hands down the most spacious in the class, and it does it while actually having one of the shorter lengths. Again, 6'3", easy fit in both rows. Ton of headroom even here with the panoramic sunroof, something that none of the competitors shown today are offered with. And while the trunk itself is not too long, it is very tall, allowing this, especially when you fold down those rear seats, to be quite the useful little van. The next thing that stands out is this has launch control. Let's get to the powertrain. It is a 1.5 liter turbocharged engine that also uses a variable vane turbo, resulting in an engine that honestly feels naturally aspirated. With only 158 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque, this engine is not going to provide a crazy amount of thrust, but it's quite efficient, especially in front-wheel drive guys. But you're honestly going to want to get all-wheel drive, because you will go from an 8-speed traditional automatic to VW's venerable 7-speed DSG dual clutch, and you get independent rear suspension. Yes, you don't get that with the front-wheel drive, something that we also see with the Toyota Corolla Cross, a car that I wanted to include in this segment, but it's honestly so hard to get hold of one of those.
While the latest gen Haldex all-wheel drive system in here is capable, and this has short overhangs, its 6.6 inches of ground clearance will have you beached pretty quick.
Here we don't have any paddle shifters, but you can shift it manually down here, and it reacts immediately. The shifts are very quick. I've already done a full, specifically DSG Taos review, but honestly, the performance benefit of the DSG really comes at the cost of smoothness. This is not a smooth transmission at low speeds, even though in like the GTI it's fine and the Audi products it's fine. Here it's jerky, and maybe it has to do with the engine tuning as well, because you give it a little bit of throttle and initially there's nothing, and you can keep your foot like exactly the same on the throttle pedal, and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, okay. I think it almost drives better in sport mode than it does in regular, but then you're sacrificing fuel economy. And while I don't think it's unbearable, it will, in my opinion, be enough to lead some people away from this thing. But once again, launch control.
My result of 8 seconds on the same stretch of road as the others is respectable, and I got 7.5 the last time I tested a Taos. The power band of the torquey little engine is well suited for this type of car. It makes passing easy too.
On some more windy roads, the Taos proves itself to be a capable little car. I think the steering and its weight make it probably the most unnatural feeling of any of the cars that I've tested here today, but it's still got a quick feeling, and pushing it through these corners. Body roll is under control, not as well kept as the Subaru, of course, but it's not all that disturbed through hitting imperfections while under G's. When it comes to comfort, I would say it feels similar to the Honda, maybe a little bit more bouncy. You have great visibility, good comfort in the seats with the adjustable lumbar, and the seats don't do any weird kind of pinching. The one thing that I just don't get is, here at the SEL level, I mean, this is a nice interior, don't get me wrong. I love the tech. The virtual cockpit is second to none in this class. I like it even more than the Honda setup. It's very configurable, but this just doesn't feel like the $37,000 MSRP that's on the side of this car.
The interior is fresh, and it has many features. The material choice and build quality are also decent, but short of the Honda and Mazda. Considering their features, the S and SE trim are much more competitive in price, but this SEL is over $2,000 more more than the more premium, much quicker Mazda CX-30.
It seems like almost a no-brainer at this trim level, but then you have to, again, consider what are the priorities of the cars, because these are vastly different. If you want something that's more techy and has a respectable backseat and cargo area, this is a much better car than the CX-30, even though me personally, I could make the choice in a heartbeat. So really, that's the truth among all four of these cars. These all have their own unique flaws, some more than others in my opinion, but they each achieve an individual purpose. The one thing that I wish more companies cared about though was reliability. So I'll briefly talk about this. Really, if you want more in-depth reports, check out my full reviews.
Mazda has been building a good reputation for itself in the last decade, and the CX-30 appears to carry that torch. Despite Honda having various smaller issues in the last 5 years, the HR-V has a proven powertrain, so it should be cheap to maintain, but it is too early for me to say much else. While the previous gen Crosstrek had various complaints, this generation is in its 6th model year and it seems to be holding up well other than some minor problems. The VW Taos, on the other hand, has had a somewhat rough start to its life here in the States, but that could have just been teething problems. With VW's history though, I wouldn't recommend it if reliability is a high priority. However, I would give a thumbs up for the Subi, Mazda, and Honda. Overall, each of these has their own appeal, but I think the new HR-V impressed me the most with its engaging ride, premium interior, ample space, and reasonable price. It's my default recommendation for the class, even when considering those seats and lack of off-the-line gusto. Despite having less broad appeal, the CX-30 is my personal favorite for its engine choices, sound systems, and slight edge in overall luxury. If a big back seat isn't necessary and you aren't scared of small windows, I'd go with this. The Crosstrek's confident handling, rugged personality, full-time all-wheel drive, and cheap yet spacious interior make it my choice for avid outdoor enthusiasts or people that prioritize comfort and poise on all roads. Plus, it's a little charming in an old hatchback kind of way, especially with 3 pedals, but it can't match the luxury or modern feel of the rest, including the VW Taos, if you're looking for the most practicality and the smallest footprint. Or if you want great tech at a good price, I would recommend the VW Taos. For more info, I will link some of my reviews on each of these below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please leave a like to help me embarrass the YouTube algorithm. If you want to see more, subscribe and hit the bell. Thank you to all my loyal patrons. I'll catch you in the next one.